The Galactic Academy was filled with the eager buzz of alien students, preparing for another lesson in their prestigious studies. They came from different planets, each with its own history, culture, and beliefs, but there was one thing that united them all: the pursuit of knowledge. They sat in a grand hall, an arena of learning where species from across the galaxy came together to study the complex web of interstellar history and diplomacy. The teacher, a wise and experienced leader, stood before them, ready to deliver another lecture on the vastness of the galaxy and the civilizations that had shaped its course. Today, however, the teacher had a different topic in mind. It wasn't one of the usual discussions about the great empires or the most advanced technologies. No, today's lesson would focus on a planet that many of the students had heard of, but never truly understood. The teacher's eyes glinted with a mysterious energy, and the students leaned forward, sensing something different about today's lesson. Today, the teacher began, his voice calm yet firm. We will discuss Earth and its role in the galaxy's history. More specifically, we will explore why humans are banned from participating in the Galactic War. The students exchanged glances, puzzled. A few even let out quiet chuckles. Humans, they thought, were primitive beings living on a low-tech planet. They had heard of Earth in passing, mostly as a curiosity, a planet far behind in technological advancement compared to the galactic powers that ruled the stars. The idea that humans could have had a significant role in galactic warfare seemed absurd to them. A few students, particularly those from more technologically advanced planets, felt a sense of superiority. After all, how could a race like humans, who had not even mastered interstellar travel, pose any real threat? But the teacher continued, his voice now laced with a hint of something that made the students uneasy. It was not always this way. Humans once had a presence in the galactic arena, and they were not as insignificant as many of you believe. In fact, the reason they are banned is because of the one thing that made them feared by every advanced species in the galaxy: their sheer will to survive. The room went silent. The students exchanged looks, confusion and disbelief written across their faces. The teacher paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle in. You see, humans possess something that no other species in the galaxy has, he continued, a unique trait that makes them formidable, even in the face of overwhelming odds, a force that is not easily understood, and one that led to their banishment. The students were now fully attentive. They had never heard of anything like this before. One brave student raised his hand. Sir, are you saying that humans, with their primitive technology and lack of galactic influence, are somehow a threat to us? The teacher smiled, but it wasn't a reassuring smile. I am not saying that humans are a threat in the traditional sense. They do not possess advanced weaponry or the ability to manipulate the fabric of space, but they have something far more dangerous: a relentless drive to fight for survival, no matter the cost. This drive makes them unpredictable, and that is why they are banned. The students were now listening closely, their skepticism giving way to curiosity. The teacher continued, revealing the true nature of humanity's strength. He told them of a time long ago when humans were forced into conflict with other species that possessed far superior technology, fleets of warships, and weapons capable of destroying entire planets. Yet despite all the advantages stacked against them, humans fought back with everything they had. They did not rely on advanced technology to win battles, but instead on their resourcefulness, their adaptability, and their unshakable resolve. The teacher explained how the humans had fought not with machines, but with their bodies and minds. When faced with impossible odds, they adapted. When cornered, they found a way out. Their ability to think and act under pressure was unlike any other species, and it was this ability that led to their greatest victories. In one of the most legendary battles, a fleet of alien warships was sent to crush a small human colony. The odds were stacked against the humans: an entire armada versus a handful of fighters. The humans had no chance, or so it seemed, but they turned the tables, using unconventional tactics that even the most experienced commanders could not anticipate. The alien fleet was destroyed, and the humans emerged victorious. It was an unprecedented victory, and it sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The lesson here was clear: humans could not be underestimated. They were capable of winning battles they had no business winning. Their ability to survive against all odds made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy, and that was why they were banned from the Galactic War. The galaxy's leaders feared what would happen if humans were ever given the chance to fight on a galactic scale. The students sat in stunned silence. They had never imagined that such a simple Seemingly weak species could be so powerful. Some were still skeptical, unable to fully comprehend the gravity of what they had just heard. But there was no denying the sense of awe that had begun to creep into the room. The teacher's words had planted a seed of doubt in their minds, doubt about their assumptions regarding humanity. The teacher could see that his students were no longer laughing. They were listening, questioning, and wondering if maybe, just maybe, there was more to humans than they had been taught. The teacher gave them a moment to reflect, then added, "But there is one more thing. What if the real reason humans are banned is not because of their power to fight, but because of something even more dangerous, something that, if allowed to spread, could change the entire galaxy?" The room grew even quieter. The teacher's words hung in the air like a thick fog, leaving the students to wonder what could possibly be worse than the humans' ability to fight back. The suspense had only just begun, and the real story of humanity was about to unfold. The students sat in silence, their minds buzzing with the new information they had just received. Some were still struggling to wrap their heads around the idea that humans, a species they had always viewed as insignificant, had somehow become a force to be feared across the galaxy. The teacher's words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. The real reason for the ban on humans had yet to be revealed, and the curiosity of the students grew with each passing moment. The teacher could see the questioning looks on their faces, the confusion mixed with a sense of disbelief. With a slight nod, he motioned for them to remain quiet, knowing that the next part of the story would be even harder to grasp. He took a deep breath, prepared to unveil the next chapter in the story of humanity's mysterious power. "You may wonder," the teacher began, his voice steady, "why, if humans were so capable, they were not integrated into the galactic forces? Why, despite their victories, were they kept out of the most important wars of the galaxy?" He paused, letting the question linger in the air. The students leaned in, eager for the answer. One student, a tall figure from the Rigel system, raised his hand again. "Sir, if they were so powerful, why are we told to fear them? Why not bring them into the fold? Unite against common enemies?" The teacher smiled a grim smile, one that suggested he knew something that would turn the students' world upside down. "That," he said slowly, "is exactly the reason why humanity is so dangerous. It's not just their strength in combat, it's their potential. Humans are unpredictable, yes, but they also have a hidden strength, something no other species in the galaxy can match, something that makes them a threat not just on the battlefield, but on a much deeper level. The power I'm speaking of is their ability to adapt, to evolve at a pace unlike any other race." The students exchanged glances, unsure of where this was going. The teacher continued, "Humans don't just survive, they change. They evolve. They find solutions to problems that seem insurmountable, and they do so quickly. When faced with new challenges, humans are not constrained by the limits of their biology or their technology. They adapt in ways that seem impossible, and they do it faster than any species I've ever encountered." One of the students, a young alien from the Andromeda system, raised an eyebrow. "But how does this make them so dangerous?" she asked, genuinely puzzled. "Every species evolves. Why is this something we should fear?" The teacher's expression became more serious, his eyes locking onto the student. "Because," he said, "humans evolve in response to threats. When a species threatens them, they don't just fight back, they change in ways that make them even more capable. They learn from their enemies, adapt to their strategies, and in some cases, they even evolve traits that give them a significant advantage. This ability, this constant evolution, makes them unstoppable." The students listened intently as the teacher continued. "It began long ago, during the first major conflict humans had with a galactic species far more advanced than they were. The human race had no advanced weapons, no fleets of warships, no command structures like those seen in other species. But what they had was a unique ability to evolve under pressure. They adapted so quickly that their enemies could not keep up. The humans' biology began to shift, subtly at first. But over time it became clear that they were evolving to combat their opponents in ways no one had ever anticipated." The room was now heavy with tension. Some of the students were starting to understand why humanity was banned. They weren't just fighting with weapons, they were fighting with their very biology, changing to become stronger, faster, and more capable in the face of any threat. It was as if they had an internal drive to become the perfect warriors. The teacher leaned forward, his voice lowering. "The first major victory for humans came during the war with the Zoraxians, a species known for their brutal tactics and near invulnerable bodies. The Zoraxians believed they could wipe out humanity with ease, thinking their advanced weapons and physical superiority would be enough. But they underestimated one thing: the human will to survive. The teacher paused for a moment, allowing the weight of his words to settle in. The students were hanging on every syllable now, their curiosity and fear building in equal measure. The Zoraxians launched their attack, confident that the humans would fold under the pressure. But instead of retreating, as any other species would have, humans adapted. Their bodies started to react to the Zoraxians' weapons. Their immune systems grew stronger, their strength increased, and they learned how to counter the Zoraxians' superior combat skills. What should have been a slaughter turned into a victory for humanity. The students sat in stunned silence. This wasn't just about fighting. It was about survival at the most primal level. Humans didn't just face their enemies, they learned from them. And in doing so, they became more powerful. The idea that a species could evolve so rapidly, so dangerously, was beyond anything most of the students had ever encountered. The teacher continued, but it wasn't just the Zoraxians. Over time, humanity's ability to evolve in the face of conflict became their greatest weapon. They fought wars, faced impossible odds, and each time they emerged victorious. They were stronger than before. And it wasn't just their bodies that adapted. Their minds did as well. Humans began to develop strategies and tactics that no one else had ever thought of, outsmarting opponents who were technologically superior. The tension in the room was palpable. Some students were beginning to grasp the magnitude of what the teacher was saying. Humans were not just another species. They were a force of nature, a wild card in the galaxy that could not be predicted or controlled. And this unpredictability, this constant evolution in response to threats, made them a threat to the entire galaxy. One student, a young alien from the distant Vega system, spoke up. So, if humans are so dangerous, why were they allowed to exist at all? Why not destroy them before they became a real threat? The teacher looked at the student, his gaze cold and thoughtful. The answer to that, he said, is that humanity's evolution has only just begun. The galaxy's leaders feared the day when humans would unite, when they would no longer fight alone, and when their full potential would be realized. They saw what humans had already done, and they knew that if left unchecked, the humans would eventually outpace every other species in the galaxy. So, they did the only thing they could think of: they banned humans from the Galactic War. The students sat in stunned silence, their minds struggling to absorb the magnitude of what they had just learned about humans. The idea that a species with no advanced technology or interstellar power could rise to such prominence in galactic history was unfathomable to them. Their understanding of warfare, of the galaxy's power structures, and of the very nature of survival had been shattered. They had always been taught that strength came from technology, from superior fleets and powerful weapons. But humans, it seemed, had something else entirely, something far more dangerous. The teacher's words had left an impression, but they could not yet fully grasp the depth of what had been revealed. The teacher noticed the mix of confusion and awe on their faces, and decided it was time to reveal the final piece of the puzzle. He walked to the center of the room, his steps deliberate, the sound of his feet echoing in the vast hall. He looked at the students, each one hanging on his every word, and began again. I know what you're thinking. How could a species like humans have this kind of power? How could they survive, evolve, and even dominate the galaxy's greatest forces with nothing but their will to live? Well, I'm about to tell you something that will change everything you think you know about them. The room grew even quieter, and the air seemed to grow thicker. The students were no longer just curious, they were on edge, filled with a sense of unease they couldn't quite explain. The teacher paused for effect, letting the suspense build. Humans, he said softly, are not like us. They are not bound by the same rules, the same limitations that we are. You see, their greatest strength is not in their technology, their weapons, or even their biology. It is in their hearts. It is their unwavering belief that no matter the odds, they will find a way to win. The teacher's words resonated deeply with the students, but they still didn't fully understand. They had seen it before: species fighting against impossible odds, struggling to survive. But there was something different about humans. The teacher continued, his voice now growing stronger. The real reason humans are feared is because of what they represent. The galaxy's leaders see them as a wild card, an unpredictable force that cannot be controlled. The fear isn't just about the power they possess, it's about the potential of what they could become. Humans are not limited by their past, their present, or even their future. They are constantly changing, constantly evolving. They are the epitome of what happens when a species refuses to accept defeat. The teacher's words struck a chord with the students. It was true, humans did not accept failure. They didn't submit to the inevitable. When pushed to the edge, when faced with certain destruction, they did not crumble. Instead, they fought harder. They adapted faster, and they emerged stronger than before. This was the secret to their power, their refusal to be broken, their unyielding spirit that refused to acknowledge any limits. It was this spirit that had allowed them to survive and even thrive in a galaxy that had long since moved beyond their reach. But the teacher was not done. "There is something else," he said, his voice lowering to a near whisper. "Something that makes humanity more dangerous than any weapon, more terrifying than any fleet of warships. It is their ability to unite. You see, despite all the odds, despite all the differences between their cultures, their factions, their peoples, humans always find a way to come together when it matters most. They may argue, they may fight amongst themselves, but when the time comes, they always stand united. That unity, that singular purpose, makes them unstoppable." The students were in awe. It was a truth they had never considered. In the galaxy, unity was rare. The species that ruled the stars often did so through division, through power struggles and territorial disputes. But humans, despite their apparent chaos, were able to put aside their differences and fight as one when they faced a common enemy. The teacher's words painted a picture of humanity not as a weak, primitive race, but as a force that, when united, could challenge even the most powerful galactic empires. The teacher paused for a moment, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. The room was still, the students deep in thought. Then, with a final, deliberate gesture, the teacher reached into a drawer and pulled out an old, worn data pad. He activated it, and a holographic image flickered to life in the center of the room. The image was of a human fleet, small by galactic standards, but deadly nonetheless. The ships were primitive, old, and covered in scars from countless battles. Yet they had survived time and time again. The teacher began to speak again, his voice now filled with a strange reverence. "This," he said, "is the fleet of the last human resistance. They fought against a galactic empire far more powerful than anything they had ever faced. The empire had fleets of warships, armies of soldiers, and weapons capable of erasing entire planets. Yet, the humans fought back. They refused to surrender, even when it seemed impossible." The students watched in stunned silence as the hologram showed the human fleet, outnumbered and outgunned, engaging the enemy with a ferocity that was both shocking and inspiring. The battle was brutal, the odds insurmountable, but the humans fought with everything they had. In the end, they were victorious, their small fleet having destroyed the mighty enemy force through sheer determination and cunning strategy. It was a moment that defied logic, a victory that should have been impossible. But to the humans, it was simply another day in their long history of survival. The teacher deactivated the hologram and turned to the students. "What you see here," he said, "is not just a victory. It is a symbol of humanity's greatest strength. It is their refusal to accept defeat. No matter how overwhelming the odds, they are not bound by logic or reason. They are driven by something deeper, something that makes them a constant, unpredictable force in the galaxy." The room was filled with an eerie silence. The students were no longer laughing or mocking. They were silent, deep in thought, struggling to understand the true nature of humanity. The teacher's lesson had shaken them to their core. The very idea that such a species, so seemingly insignificant, could hold such power was beyond their comprehension. Yet, in that moment, they understood that the ban on humans wasn't just about their military prowess or their technological inferiority. It was about their heart, their will to survive, and the terrifying potential they held. And as the teacher looked around the room, he knew that the students now understood the truth. Humans were not just a species to be dismissed. They were a force to be reckoned with, and if the galaxy ever underestimated them again, it would be at its own peril. The students sat there in stunned silence, their minds reeling from the revelations they had just witnessed. The holographic images of the human fleet battling against impossible odds were still fresh in their minds, and the weight of the teacher's words hung heavily in the air. The idea that a species as primitive as humans could rise up and defeat such powerful forces seemed beyond belief. Yet there it was, right before their eyes. The truth was undeniable. Humans were not just an underdog species. They were a force of nature that defied all expectations. The teacher allowed the silence to stretch for a moment longer, letting the students process everything they had learned. He knew that the gravity of the situation had hit them hard, and He could see the mix of awe and fear in their expressions. This wasn't just about the humans' ability to fight back. This was about something deeper, something that transcended technology, biology, and even warfare itself. The teacher's voice broke the silence, low and serious. "But there is something you need to understand," he said, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Humans didn't just survive. They learned." The students looked at each other, confusion still evident in their eyes. One of the students, a young alien from a peaceful world, raised their hand, uncertain but curious. "Sir, you're saying that humans learned from their enemies? They adapted." "Yes. But to learn from the enemy, isn't that dangerous?" The teacher nodded slowly, his expression grim. "Exactly. It's dangerous, and that's why the galaxy fears them. When humans fight, they don't just survive, they learn from their enemies. They study their tactics, understand their weaknesses, and then they evolve to overcome them. This is something no other species has done on such a scale, and it's something that terrifies even the most advanced civilizations." The students fell quiet, each one trying to wrap their minds around the idea. The teacher continued, speaking of humanity's relentless drive to learn and improve, to never be satisfied with their current state. He explained that while other species relied on superior technology or overwhelming numbers, humans relied on something more primal: their ability to adapt and overcome. They didn't just fight the battles they were given. They studied their enemies, they observed, and then they found ways to turn the odds in their favor. The teacher recounted an ancient tale, one that had been passed down through the generations of the human race. It was a story of a time when the humans were faced with an enemy that no one could defeat: the Acryl, a ruthless species known for their strength, speed, and advanced technology. The Acryl had invaded Earth, expecting to conquer it within weeks. The humans were no match for them. But instead of surrendering, instead of giving up, the humans did something remarkable. They studied the Acryl. They learned everything they could about their biology, their culture, and their tactics. And then, when the time came, they adapted. The humans didn't just fight the Acryl, they became the Acryl. They used the Akryl's own strategies against them, turning their strengths into weaknesses. It wasn't just a battle of technology or firepower, it was a battle of minds. The humans, with their ability to observe and learn, turned the tide and defeated the Acryl, not by overpowering them, but by outhinking them. As the teacher finished telling the story, the students were left speechless. The idea that humans could learn from their enemies in such a profound way was almost beyond comprehension. It wasn't just their ability to fight, it was their ability to think and adapt. It was their greatest strength, and it was also what made them so dangerous. The teacher leaned forward, his gaze intense. The humans' greatest weapon is not their weapons or their technology, it is their minds. They are capable of learning in ways no other species can match, and that is why they are a threat to the galaxy. If they ever come together, if they ever unite as one, there will be nothing that can stand against them. The students exchanged looks, a sense of unease creeping into their minds. They had always thought of the galaxy as a place where the strongest species ruled, where the most advanced technology decided the fate of empires. But now, they were faced with the terrifying possibility that a species like humans, with their seemingly primitive technology, could rise up and challenge the very order of the galaxy. Humanity's greatest strength, the teacher continued, is their ability to adapt. They don't just fight, they evolve. And that's why they're banned from galactic warfare. They can't be controlled. They can't be predicted. They are a wild card, a force that could unravel everything the galaxy has worked for. The students sat in stunned silence, the weight of the teacher's words settling over them. Some of them were beginning to see humanity in a new light. They were no longer just a primitive race struggling to survive on a distant planet. They were a species that had survived by evolving faster than any enemy could keep up. They were a species that could outthink, outfight, and outlast any opponent, no matter how advanced or powerful. One of the students, a young alien with bright, inquisitive eyes, raised their hand again. But if humans are so dangerous, why haven't they risen up already? Why are they still so isolated? The teacher smiled, a bitter smile. Because they are still fragmented. The humans are divided, each faction fighting for its own survival, its own cause. But once they come together, once they unite under a single banner, that will be the moment the galaxy will truly fear them. And that day is coming. It's only a matter of time. The room was silent once more, the students now fully aware of the danger humanity posed. The teacher had shown them a side of humanity that none of them had ever considered. The humans were not just survivors, They were warriors in the truest sense of the word. They didn't rely on advanced technology or overwhelming force. They relied on their minds, their adaptability, and their unyielding will to survive. As the class came to a close, the students left the room with heavy hearts and a sense of unease. They had learned more about humanity in one lesson than they had ever thought possible. And though they were still uncertain about what the future held, one thing was clear: humans were not to be underestimated. The galaxy had made a grave mistake in banning them from the Galactic War. The question now was how long it would take for the humans to unite. And when that day came, what would the galaxy do? The tension in the academy had reached its peak. The students could no longer ignore the truth that had been laid bare before them. Humans, a species they had once dismissed as primitive, were now the subject of their deepest fears. They were a race capable of learning and evolving at an alarming rate. A species that could turn the tide of any conflict, no matter the odds. The teacher's words had shaken them, and they couldn't help but wonder what would happen if humanity ever overcame its divisions and united under a single banner. What would the galaxy look like then? The more they thought about it, the more they realized that the consequences of underestimating humans could be catastrophic. The days following the lecture were filled with whispered conversations. Among the students, some still struggled to accept the idea that humans were more than just a primitive species fighting for survival. They couldn't fathom that the human race, despite its technological shortcomings, had developed the ability to evolve and adapt in ways no other species had. The teacher had told them that humanity's greatest strength was their ability to learn, to outsmart and outlast any enemy, and that idea was still hard for many of them to comprehend. But as the weeks went by, the students found themselves studying humanity's history in greater detail. They pored over ancient records and simulations, analyzing human warfare tactics and survival strategies. What they discovered only deepened their sense of awe and fear. Humans didn't just win their battles, they made their enemies question everything they thought they knew about warfare. They had fought off powerful empires, species with far superior technology, and yet they had survived, time and time again. The records told stories of humans facing overwhelming forces, and emerging victorious not because they were stronger, but because they were smarter, more adaptable, and more determined than anyone could have imagined. One particular story stood out among the rest. It was the story of the Battle of Lyris, a battle that had taken place many centuries ago, when the humans had been caught in the crossfire of two warring galactic empires. The humans, having no desire to be caught in the conflict, had sought refuge on a barren planet on the outskirts of known space. But when both empires arrived in full force, they saw the humans as nothing more than a nuisance, a species that had no place in the grander scheme of things. The two empires, united by their mutual desire to crush the human resistance, launched a full-scale invasion. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a massacre waiting to happen. The humans were outmatched, outgunned, and vastly outnumbered. Their weapons were rudimentary at best, and their defenses were nothing compared to the massive fleets of the empires. Yet the humans fought back, not with brute force but with their minds. They turned the barren planet's environment against the invaders. Using the terrain to their advantage, they set traps, laid false trails, and used guerrilla tactics to confuse and frustrate the Empire's soldiers. The Empire's generals couldn't understand it. How could such a weak, primitive species outsmart them at every turn? The humans' tactics were unlike anything they had ever seen, and despite their superior technology, the invaders were slowly being driven back. It was during this battle that the true extent of humanity's adaptive abilities became clear. The humans didn't just fight, they learned. They studied their enemies, observed their strategies, and adapted in real time. The more the empires tried to outmaneuver the humans, the more the humans found ways to counter their every move. It wasn't long before the once unstoppable forces of the two empires were on the defensive. In the end, the humans had not only survived, but had inflicted a devastating defeat upon both sides, forcing the empires to retreat in disgrace. The Battle of Lyris became one of humanity's most celebrated victories, a victory that was won not through brute force but through intelligence, adaptability, and an unwavering refusal to accept defeat. The students, upon reading this account, were left in awe. They had never seen anything like it. The human ability to adapt, to learn from their enemies, and to turn the tide of battle was something no other species could match. It was a trait that made them both feared and respected, and it was the very thing that had led to their banishment from galactic warfare. The galaxy's leaders had seen what humans were capable of, and they knew that if humans were ever allowed to unite, The balance of power in the galaxy would shift irreparably. The fear wasn't just about humanity's current power, it was about the potential of what they could become. And that potential was limitless. As the students sat in the Academy's Great Hall, discussing what they had learned, a sense of unease began to settle in. Some students began to question the decisions made by the galaxy's leaders. Why had humanity been kept out of the war? Was it because of their potential to be a force for good? Or was it simply out of fear? The more they thought about it, the more they realized that humanity's banishment wasn't just about their military prowess. It was about their very nature. The humans were unpredictable, and that made them dangerous. But it also made them something more. It made them a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, a species could rise up and overcome the impossible. One student, a young alien from the Tarax system, voiced what many of the others were thinking. What if the ban on humans is wrong? She asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. What if the galaxy is making a mistake by keeping them out of the war? What if they could help us, instead of being a threat? The teacher looked at the student, his gaze serious. The galaxy is afraid of what might happen if humanity ever unites. But that fear is what keeps them from seeing the truth. Humans are not just a species of warriors, they are survivors. And they could teach us all something if we allowed them to be part of the greater galactic order. But that decision is not ours to make. The room fell silent once again. The students were now faced with a difficult truth. Humans were not just dangerous, they were the future of the galaxy. If the galaxy's leaders were right to fear them, then they were also right to recognize the immense power they held. But the real question was not whether humanity could be a threat. It was whether the galaxy could afford to keep them out of the war forever. The students had learned something that day, a truth that would forever change their view of humanity. The day might come when the humans, united and stronger than ever, would have to make their own choice to remain on the fringes of the galaxy, forever banned from the war, or to rise up and claim their place in the galactic order. But no matter what path humanity chose, one thing was certain: the galaxy had underestimated them once, and that was a mistake it would never make again. The days following the revelation of humanity's past were filled with uncertainty and tension. As the students began to grapple with the truth they had learned, they were no longer just talking about a species struggling to survive on a distant planet. They were now facing a species that had defied all expectations, had triumphed over impossible odds, and had been banned from galactic war not because they were weak, but because they were too strong, too unpredictable. The students couldn't stop talking about the implications of what they had learned. They were forced to confront the fact that humanity was not only capable of survival, but of something far more dangerous: the potential for change, for evolution in real time. Some students felt uneasy, unsure about how to process the idea that the galaxy's leaders had locked humanity away for fear of what they could become. Could it be that the leaders were wrong to ban humans? Could it be that the very thing they feared was what the galaxy needed to survive the coming storms? The more they thought about it, the more they wondered if the fear that had led to humanity's exile was a mistake that had cost them the potential for an allied. In the Academy's quiet hallways, a group of students gathered. They were a mix of species, each of them having come to the Academy to learn, to understand, and to expand their knowledge of the galaxy. They had always been told that unity was the key to survival, that the galaxy's strongest species were those who worked together, who collaborated in the face of adversity. But humanity's story had shattered that belief. The humans didn't need anyone to survive, they did it alone. And in doing so, they had become a force no one had expected. One student, a quiet alien from the Draco system, spoke first. If humanity can adapt like this, if they can learn from every threat, from every enemy, then why are they being kept out? Why are we treating them like some kind of dangerous experiment? They could be the allies we need. We could learn from them. We could adapt with them. Her words lingered in the air as the others considered them. The idea of working with humans, of learning from them, seemed almost too radical to be possible. The galactic leaders had seen humanity's potential, and they had reacted with fear. But fear of what exactly? The students knew that the decision to keep humanity out of the war was not just about weapons or technology, it was about control. If humans were ever allowed to join the war, if they were ever allowed to fight alongside the galaxy's most powerful species, there was no telling what they could do. But at what cost? Another student, a tall figure from the Andromeda system, spoke with a sense of urgency. What if humanity's greatest power is not in their ability to adapt or survive, but in their willingness to unite when the stakes are They don't fight for power. They fight for each other. They fight for their home. We are afraid of them because they are a mirror to us. They remind us of what we could be if we embraced unity. The conversation that followed was one of deep reflection. The students, who had come from worlds of division and complex politics, began to see humanity through a different lens. It wasn't just their adaptability that set them apart. It was their ability to come together when needed most. It was their ability to find strength not just in themselves but in each other. As the galaxy's leaders kept humanity at arm's length, these students began to realize that the real threat humanity posed wasn't to be feared, but to be understood. The true question wasn't whether humanity could pose a danger to the galaxy. It was whether the galaxy could afford to ignore them any longer. The teacher, aware of the growing conversation among his students, decided it was time for another lesson. He gathered them all in the Academy's central hall, where holographic displays of galactic history stretched across the walls. He could see the uncertainty in their eyes, the weight of the decision they were grappling with. They had learned about humanity's strength, its evolution, and its refusal to accept defeat. But now they needed to understand the larger picture. As the students settled into their seats, the teacher began, his voice calm but filled with purpose. You have all come to realize that humans are not just survivors, they are something more. They have faced the worst that the galaxy can throw at them, and yet they endure. But the question I must now ask you is this: can the galaxy afford to keep them at bay forever? And what would happen if they ever chose to break free from their exile? The students were quiet, each of them considering the implications of the teacher's question. One student, a young alien from a distant star system, finally spoke up, his voice filled with uncertainty. What if humanity decides to leave the Ben behind? What if they break free from their exile and seek their place in the galaxy? How would the galaxy react? What would we do? The teacher's eyes darkened, and his tone grew serious. If humanity were ever to break free, to challenge the galaxy's decision to keep them out, there would be consequences. The galaxy's leaders would have no choice but to respond. They would be forced to face the humans on their own terms. The fear of humanity's potential would be tested, and the balance of power in the galaxy would shift. The students exchanged uneasy glances. They understood now that the fear surrounding humanity wasn't unfounded. The humans were a threat, but not in the way they had once thought. It wasn't about military power or technology. It was about something far more profound: their ability to unite, to adapt, and to fight for their survival. It was a power that no one had anticipated, and one that could, if left unchecked, change the course of galactic history. The teacher continued, humans are not afraid of change. They embrace it, and that is what makes them dangerous to the old order. If they ever find a way to unite and take their place among the stars, the galaxy will be forced to confront a new reality, a reality where they are no longer the underdogs, the outcasts. Humans will become a force that cannot be ignored. As the teacher's words hung in the air, the students sat in silence, each of them contemplating the future of the galaxy. The fear of humanity was no longer just about their strength in battle. It was about their ability to change the rules of the game. They were the wild card, the unknown variable that no one could control. And if the galaxy's leaders had made one mistake, it was thinking they could keep humanity locked away forever. The students now realized that humanity's future was not written in the stars. It was up to them to decide what role they would play in the galaxy, and whether the galaxy was ready for them or not. One thing was clear: humanity was on the verge of something greater, and when that moment came, everything in the galaxy would change. The days following the teacher's final lecture were filled with an unsettling sense of anticipation. The students, who had once seen humanity as a distant, primitive species, now viewed them through a completely different lens. They understood now why the galaxy's leaders feared them. Humans were not just survivors, they were a force to be reckoned with, a species that could adapt to any challenge, learn from every enemy, and unite like no other race in the galaxy. The question no longer was whether humans could be a threat. It was whether the galaxy could continue to ignore them, continue to ban them from the galactic war, or whether the time had finally come for humanity to rise and claim its place among the stars. In the weeks that followed, rumors began to spread throughout the Academy. Whispers of rebellion, of factions within the galaxy's ruling council considering the possibility of lifting the ban on humans, filled the air. The fear of humanity's potential had kept them locked away for so long. But now, as tensions grew and threats from other corners of the galaxy emerged, some leaders began to wonder if it was time to let humanity fight alongside them. There were whispers that the humans, unified and strong, might be exactly what the galaxy needed to face the growing threats that no one else could handle. The teacher, who had been guiding the students through their lessons, had become more distant. There was a sense of urgency in his movements now, a quiet intensity in the way he spoke. He had seen this moment coming, had known that the question of humanity's place in the galaxy would eventually have to be answered. And though the students had learned much about the human strength, their adaptability, and their unyielding spirit, the teacher knew that the real test had only just begun. One day, as the students gathered in the academy's central hall for their final lecture, the teacher's face was grimmer than usual. He had been called to a secret council meeting by the galaxy's leaders, a meeting that would determine humanity's fate. The students could sense the weight of the moment, the finality in the air. The teacher, knowing this was his last chance to speak to them before the council made their decision, stood before them, his voice low but steady. "It has come to this," he began. "The time has come for the galaxy to decide whether it will continue to live in fear of humanity, or whether it will finally accept the truth that no matter how much we try to control, no matter how many rules we make, humanity will never be held back. They are not just a species to be feared, they are a species to be respected. And the time is coming when they will no longer accept the ban. Whether we are ready for them or not, humanity will make their move." The students listened, their minds racing. They had been taught to fear humanity's potential, to see them as an unpredictable force, one that could disrupt the delicate balance of power in the galaxy. But now, hearing the teacher's words, they realized that humanity's rise was inevitable. The fear that had once kept them out was slowly being replaced with a sense of awe. The galaxy could no longer ignore the truth. Humans were ready, and the question was no longer whether they would be allowed to join the war, it was when. The teacher paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle in. He could see the uncertainty in their eyes, the conflict between fear and admiration. "You will all be part of the galaxy's future," he continued. "Some of you will stand with humanity, and some of you will oppose them. But know this, the galaxy will never be the same once humanity has entered the fray. When the leaders of the galaxy make their decision, they will be forced to reckon with the one thing they have always feared, the full might of humanity united." As the teacher's words echoed in the hall, the students couldn't help but feel a sense of dread and excitement at the same time. They had learned of humanity's strength, their unyielding spirit, and their potential to change the course of galactic history. But now, the real question was whether the galaxy's leaders could accept this new reality. Could they accept a species that had once been considered beneath them, a species they had underestimated? For so long, days turned into weeks, and the students waited anxiously for news. The rumors grew louder, the whispers of change more persistent. The council was in turmoil, divided over whether to lift the ban and allow humanity to join the galactic war. Some saw it as the only way to face the growing threats that no one else could handle, while others feared that allowing humanity to enter the war would be the galaxy's undoing. The decision was not easy, and the galaxy's future hung in the balance. Finally, the day arrived. The council's decision had been made, and the fate of humanity was sealed. The teacher stood before the students once more, his face betraying no emotion. "The decision has been made," he said, his voice steady. "Humanity will be allowed to join the war." The students were stunned. They had known it was coming, but hearing it spoken aloud made it feel real, made it feel inevitable. Humanity, once locked away, once feared and misunderstood, was finally going to take its place in the galaxy's future. But with this decision came the inevitable consequences. The galaxy's leaders knew that humanity's entrance into the war would change everything. The balance of power would shift. No longer would the galaxy's strongest species dominate the battlefield. Humanity's unpredictable, adaptive nature would be an equalizer that no one could ignore. The galaxy's future was now in the hands of the humans. As the students left the hall that day, they knew that everything had changed. The time of fear was over. Humanity had earned its place among the stars, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The day would come when humans would rise, united in purpose, and challenge the galaxy's power structures. And when that day arrived, the universe would remember the species they had once feared, the species that had fought not just with weapons but with their hearts, their minds, and their will to survive. The wild card had entered the game, and there was no turning back. The galaxy had underestimated humanity once, but now, with their future secured, the question was no longer whether they could win. It was what they would do when they finally took their place as equals in the galactic order. The day had arrived when humanity's fate was sealed. The galaxy could no longer avoid the inevitable. The leaders of the galaxy had finally made their decision, and as the final verdict echoed across the stars, there was a ripple of change that none could deny. Humanity would join the war, and with it came a new chapter for the galaxy, one that would be written by the hands of those who had once been cast aside. The humans were not just survivors, they were a force that would now challenge everything the galaxy thought it knew, and as they rose up to claim their place, they carried with them the hope and the fear of an entire galaxy that had underestimated them. For far too long, the tension was palpable in every corner of the galaxy. Some factions rejoiced seeing the potential in humanity's strength, others feared the repercussions of their entrance into the war. The balance of power had shifted, and now no one could predict what would come next. The humans had long fought for survival on their home planet, but now they would fight for a greater purpose. Their unity was their greatest weapon, and with every step they took, they proved that when humanity stood together, nothing could stand in their way. The galaxy's leaders would soon come to understand that the very thing they had feared was the one thing they needed more than anything else: unity. The humans had brought something to the galaxy that no one else had been able to create, a bond that transcended borders and species. They were not just joining the war, they were changing the way the galaxy would forever function. The story of humanity was not one of simple survival or brutal warfare. It was a story of growth and resilience, of learning and evolving. With each challenge faced, they adapted, becoming something even the most advanced species could never foresee. And now, as they stood on the brink of entering the galactic conflict, they carried with them not just their strength, but the knowledge that they had earned their place in the stars. The humans were no longer the outcasts they had once been. Now they were equals, and it was clear that the galaxy would never be the same again. The final decision had been made. Humanity had earned their right to fight, and the galaxy would soon learn that the one thing they had feared the most was the very thing that would lead to their salvation. Humanity was no longer banned. They were now a part of the grand galactic order, and no matter what came next, the galaxy would have to face the undeniable truth: humans were no longer the wild card. They were the future, and they would no longer be ignored or underestimated. They were ready for whatever came next, and the galaxy was about to witness a power they could never have imagined before. With that, the galaxy's greatest chapter was about to begin, a chapter written by the hands of humanity. The end.